All right, so Esley, or Lesley, but known as Lesley Riddle, was a very accomplished blues musician. He's from Burnsville, North Carolina, just across the mountains, a rock or two throw away from here. It's been a lot of his life between Kingsport, Tennessee, and Burnsville, North Carolina. He was one of the early guys on what's deemed John Henry Lyons' porch here in Kingsport. There was in the 1920s and 30s, there was actually a fairly robust blues movement here in the area, and he was at the forefront of that. Great musician. He played with all the folks that are on records that are from this area, like Brownie McGee. He was really good friends with Stephen Tarter of Tarter Gay, and played numerous shows with them. And he was very fervent in the I guess you could say the promotion of local music, because he had had an injury, an industrial injury. So his way of making income after that injury was his music. So he was prolific at going out and finding music that could be played, and finding opportunities for local African Americans to play in the community. And the interesting thing about Southern Appalachia in the 1920s and 1930s is there was just a love for music, and it wasn't really either African American or there was a white audience, or where we can't do these things because we're in the South. Basically, if you were a great musician and somebody had a dance or had a barbecue or whatever and needed a musician, folks showed up. So in modern America, we kind of think of music along the genres that record labels produced. Like there's R&B and blues, and there's country, and there's the modern thing that's called bluegrass. But back in the 20s and 30s, there was just music, and you were either big city music or you were the music of the people of the country, which in Southern Appalachia, the what's known as traditional music that would turn into kind of the foundation of country music was a kind of a mixture of Scott and Irish traditional ballads with the influence of African American musicians. And so that's kind of a unique little music, and he was part of that. So he's kind of this mystery figure. I know you see or hear things about the Carter family and his connection to them, and he's always this kind of shadowy figure in the background. But he was instrumental in getting local African Americans to talk to A.P. Carter and with their experience in music, and hey, tell this guy how you arrange songs, what's the purpose of that song. And a lot of those things became the early foundation of country music. So he's just one of my local musical heroes. Well, the interesting thing, as far as my understanding, A.P. Carter asked around after he was already an established musician, had been recording records a couple years, and the Carter family quickly ran out of songs that they thought they could put on record. Or they had done so much early on that AP asked around, who's somebody who knows some traditional Southern Appalachian songs that I'm not familiar with? And he was directed to the house of John Henry Lyons in the African American community here in Kingsport, and that I call it the John Henry Lyons front porch. It was kind of like the epicenter of blues in this region. And you would have traveling blues guys from all over the Southeast who, if they were in the area, at one point or another, they would be on the front porch picking and playing, and just kind of the hangout. It was the hangout house where all the musicians gathered when they weren't doing shows. And one of the early stories I've heard about Lesley Riddle was that he actually met Blind Lemon Jefferson on the front porch of this guy's house, this blues guy that there's no recordings of, and I've tried to do research on who he was. There's very little, because most of his direct family moved away from here in the 30s or 40s. But anyway, Lesley was sitting on the front porch with the other musicians, and up pops A.P. Carter. Says, hey, I'm looking for songs, and can understand that he was actually talking to John Henry Lyons. I understand a lot of the local musicians and a lot of great local African American traditional songs here in Southern Appalachia. Can you help me? And he's like, well, he can help you, and so that was kind of the introduction of Lesley Riddle and A.P. Carter there on the steps of John Henry's house. And basically, I don't know if it was just a mutual appreciation or love for music. I surmise it was a mutual appreciation and love for music, and A.P. Carter had made a little money already in records, and he was willing to pay some money for to be taken out, introduced to local farmers and folks that normally, it'd be kind of caution or get the shotgun out if some white guy who's a stranger came walking up, to the front door wanting to talk to Grandpa. Who are you? So they used Lesley Riddle because he was so well known in the community as a musician that all the African American communities here in Virginia and in North Carolina and Tennessee and in this part of the mountains, he was a known commodity. So if he showed up and brought A.P. Carter, it's like, okay, this guy must be legit because he's with Lesley. And I know you see a lot in written history about him being called Esley. That was his nickname that one of the Carters actually gave him. One of the Carter children couldn't say Lesley; they said Esley. So that's where you see his name written as Esley. It's because that was his Carter family nickname. But at one point, they became really good friends. He actually lived with A.P. Carter, which was after him and his wife separated. So I don't know the capacity of that, but that was kind of unusual in the 1930s or 40s that a white guy and a black guy in Southern Appalachia were actually so good friends that they actually lived together. So it's always been one of those things where so much is not known about his music because with AP, that was just a friend. That wasn't like a business associate. So sometime in the early 40s, Lesley gave up music. It was such a struggle being a musician. That was his primary thing. He moved to New York and worked in a factory. So the time frame that he was a musician is mid-20s to early 40s, and then he didn't play guitar again for like 25 years until someone sought him out and said, aren't you the guy who was friends with Brownie McGee and sitting on the front porch? I heard some story about you, and there's some story about A.P. Carter and a guy named Lesley Riddle. Is that you? And yeah, that's me. So he kind of had this late in life acknowledgement, and did put out an album on Rounder, but which was all like traditional songs he had played in the 1920s and 30s. Well, it's my understanding that he was sought out, and it all stemmed from, I think it was an interview what Brownie McGee did sometime in the 60s about his early childhood and some of the folks who were inspirations in his life and his friends in music. And he mentioned Lesley Riddle because I think someone had asked him about, did you know the Carter family or something like that, and he automatically says, yeah, Lesley Riddle, he lives so and so in New York. He's got, I think he had 8 fingers because he had a couple cut off or issues, things happen, and life is tough, and so he automatically knew who they were talking about. But he was this mystery person in music, had just kind of fallen out of the scene because he had a life, and to him, music wasn't what it is today. I think one of the things in his life, he was really good friends with all these guys, and when Stephen Tarter and Harry Gay went to the second recording sessions in Bristol, and they cut Unknown Blues, Brownie Blues. So they both made $50 because you basically the band got $50 per song. So there's 2 guys in the band. So They made $50, and that's all they ever made. Not even sure if either one of them even ever saw a copy of their record, and it didn't sell well. So as far as the local musicians thought, there's not any music in records. Records just a gimmick. Making any money in music is playing shows. So he never really pursued that. And then when they're in the 40s, when we're in the war and basically all the money dried up for social events because we're in this war cause, so there's not backyard picnics and barbecues and sock hops and dances and things of that nature. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for him in music, so he said, okay, I'm going to move on to the next thing, and he put it behind him and never picked up a guitar again until somebody knocked on his door and say, hey, aren't you that Lesley Riddle guy from Kingsport, Tennessee? And he said, well, yeah, I am. So I think he embraced that, though. He moved back, he retired, moved back to his hometown in Burnsville, North Carolina, and now they have the Riddle Fest over there in his honor. Just a very interesting character. I don't know a lot about him, but I would like to know more. I think basically what you've heard from me, if you ask anyone who's a music historian, you're going to get those high notes, but the man behind that is still a mystery. I think get a better understanding of the John Henry Lyons early. He's just a character that's a name as well. The early years of Lesley Riddle playing music and all the connections with all the musicians in Southern Appalachia that he had, and my thing, I've always been interested in the blues aspect, but there's so many folks who went on to become country music, household names as well that he played music with. Just kind of understanding the dynamics of when he was alive, and the Kingsport went from being this little village of like 300 people or so to exploding overnight, thousands and thousands of people and people moving here, and it was kind of like the gold rush towns of out west, and so there was this fervent energy here, and it was called the Magic City because just pow, it happened, and there's this big industrial city where there used to be farmland that took, the only way to get to it was by train because it was so isolated in the mountains. And there was the music, the dynamic, the music of that era and what happened here. He plays a significant part in that. And so just kind of understanding how that fits into the history of the region and his importance in building those bonds and relationships among musicians that led to folks like the Carter family singing these songs that most likely would never have ever made it to record if it had not been for that relationship with AP, and that relationship with AP would have not been forged if he wasn't interested in the local blues music scene and what was happening on the front porch at John Henry's house. Because you think if there's all these guys who are good musicians, just because you're a good musician doesn't mean you're maybe that great in relationships. So of all the people that was kind of handpicked off of the porch to go, you're the guy, because you're the guy who can get these folks to talk to him, go do it. So just to know more about those dynamics, I think it'd be interesting.